Dead America. Tales from New York. Carl, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0. 10:47 p.m. Carl maneuvered his sedan through the desolate streets of North Manhattan, the late hour removing all traffic. Having only roused from sleep half an hour prior, he still felt the lingering haze of fatigue clinging to him like a second skin. "I swear, these night shifts are going to kill me," he muttered to himself. "I'm getting too old for this bull." Coming to a stop at a red light, Carl glanced across the intersection and caught sight of his favorite all-night diner, its neon sign flickering in the night. He checked his watch with a resigned sigh. "What the hell, I'm already late," he reasoned with himself. "Might as well pick up some coffee. Doesn't do me much good to be asleep at my post. The city is depending on me after all." A wry chuckle escaped his lips at the irony of his own words. While his role at the City Emergency Response Center held the potential for critical importance, most of his shifts were spent monitoring screens, waiting for something significant to occur. With a glance in both directions, Carl eased through the red light, pulling into an empty spot just outside the diner. Stepping out of the car, he paused to stretch his weary muscles, feeling the strain of years of service etched into his bones. Spending his youth as a volunteer firefighter had been fulfilling, but it had taken a toll on his body. Now in his early 50s, he was all too aware of the constant reminders of his younger, more resilient self. "I wonder if they have an ibuprofen burger," he mused aloud. Carl's chuckle echoed softly in the night air, way too pleased with his own wit. He pushed open the door and was greeted by the familiar voice of Bruce, the chef. "Hey Carl, what do you say, buddy?" Bruce called out from the kitchen, his tone warm and friendly. "Not much, Bruce," Carl replied with a weary grin. "Another day older and feeling every single one of them." Bruce chuckled in response, poking his head out further from the bustling kitchen. "You heading in or heading home?" "Bastards got me on night shift for going on 3 weeks now," Carl explained with a hint of resignation. "We got a couple of new guys that need to get trained up, and it's easier to do it when things are quiet." "And you're stuck with the newbies?" Bruce raised an eyebrow in sympathy. "What can I say? I'm a victim of my own success," Carl quipped, a self-deprecating smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, same here, brother," Bruce said. "They got me working a double today. So anyway, what can I get you? You want the usual?" "Yeah, might as well," Carl agreed with a shrug. "I know it's unhealthy as hell, but we all gotta die of something, right?" Bruce laughed as he disappeared back into the kitchen. "Damn straight we do. Give me just a couple of minutes and I'll get you squared away. Oh, and feel free to grab a cup of coffee. You know where everything is." Carl nodded his thanks as he made his way to the coffee pot, selecting the largest paper cup available and filling it to the brim. He inhaled deeply, savoring the rich aroma of the brew. "You are the first of many, if I'm going to make it through the night," he muttered to the coffee. Returning to the counter with his precious cargo, Carl's moment of peace was interrupted by the insistent ringing of his phone. Glancing at the caller ID, he saw it was work calling. With a resigned sigh, he sent the call to voicemail and settled onto a stool to enjoy his coffee. But his brief reprieve was short-lived as the phone began ringing again, the same caller ID flashing on the screen. Carl's frustration grew as he sent it to voicemail once more, determined to savor his moment of respite. Before he could put the phone back into his pocket, it began ringing again. Sensing that it wouldn't stop, he answered reluctantly. "Guys, give me a break, will you?" he muttered into the phone. Before Carl could finish his sentence, a sense of urgency permeated the air as a panicked voice pierced through the line. It was Grant, another member of Carl's overnight shift crew. "Oh, thank God you're okay, Carl," Grant exclaimed, his voice laced with anxiety. "Dang, Grant, I know I'm a few minutes late, but you don't have to get all dramatic on me," Carl responded, attempting to diffuse the tension with a touch of humor. "Where are you? How close are you?" Grant's voice trembled with fear and urgency, a stark contrast to his usual calm demeanor. Carl's concern deepened at the uncharacteristic panic in Grant's tone. "I'm down here at Bruce's diner grabbing some coffee and food." What's going on? Carl inquired, his own apprehension mounting. It's a shit show, Carl. We need you here. Now. Grant's words cut through the air like a knife, his desperation palpable even through the phone line. Yeah, okay, I'll be there in just a couple of minutes, Carl assured. Grant momentarily quelled his panic, his voice taking on an eerie calmness. Carl, watch yourself out there, he warned, his words laden with an unspoken threat. And for the love of God, make sure the garage door is secure before coming in, Grant added, his tone leaving no room for argument. Carl was caught off guard by Grant's sudden shift in demeanor, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Grant, what's going on? Before he could receive a response, the line erupted into a cacophony of indiscernible shouts, leaving Carl bewildered and unsettled. Just watch yourself out there, Carl, and don't let anybody get close to you. And I mean anybody. Grant's final words echoed in Carl's mind as the line went dead, leaving him with a sinking feeling of unease. Carl sat in stunned silence, his gaze fixed on the now silent phone, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and concern. He was jolted back to reality by Bruce's arrival with his meal. It's normally 12, but just give me 10 and we'll call it good, Bruce stated, unaware of the turmoil brewing within Carl. Bruce's concern deepened as he observed Carl's distant expression, sensing the weight of the situation bearing down on him. Carl, are you okay, buddy? Bruce inquired. Huh? Oh yeah, sorry, Bruce. That was work, Carl replied, his mind still preoccupied with the unsettling phone call. Bruce could see the worry etched into Carl's features, and the realization of Carl's profession was enough to send a shiver down his spine. Forget the money, Carl. Just get to work, Bruce urged, his own apprehension evident in his voice. With a nod of acknowledgement, Carl rose from his seat, clutching the bag of food tightly as he made his way towards the diner's entrance. Pausing at the threshold, he turned back to face Bruce. I want you to do me a favor, Bruce, Carl said. Whatever you need, buddy, Bruce replied without hesitation. I want you to lock this place down tight. And don't let anybody in until you hear from me, Carl instructed, his words carrying a sense of urgency. Terrified by the gravity of Carl's words, Bruce stood stunned for a moment before regaining his composure and nodding in agreement. Okay, yeah, Carl, I'll do that right now, Bruce affirmed, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I don't care who they are. Do not let anybody in, Carl emphasized, his gaze locking with Bruce's. I will. But what the hell is going on, Carl? Bruce pressed, his own anxiety mounting with each passing moment. I don't know yet, but I have a bad feeling about it, Carl admitted. Oh hell. When you get bad feelings about stuff, we usually end up on the news, Bruce remarked grimly. Carl stepped out of the diner, his senses on high alert as he scanned the surrounding streets for any signs of trouble. People moved about a few blocks away, but their actions were indiscernible from this distance. Entering his car, Carl glanced back at the diner just in time to see Bruce locking the doors and pulling down a metal gate over the entrance. Bruce flashed him a thumbs up before Carl started the engine and pulled away. Driving towards work, Carl remained vigilant, pausing at each intersection to survey the area for any signs of danger. Though he spotted people milling about a few blocks away, it wasn't an entirely uncommon sight and didn't raise any immediate alarms. As he approached his workplace, a nondescript two-story building nestled between larger structures, Carl couldn't help but feel a sense of dreariness settle over him. It was the kind of unassuming building you'd expect to house an emergency center. Turning into the alley that led to the underground parking garage, Carl glanced around once more, ensuring he was alone before rolling down his window. With practiced efficiency, he punched in the code for the gate, watching it slowly ascend to grant him access. Once through, it sealed shut behind him without incident. I swear to God, if this is a practical joke, I'm going to beat every one of them to within an inch of their lives, Carl muttered to himself, frustration seeping into his voice. I'm too old for this bullshit. Carl shook his head in disbelief as he exited his car, his hands full with food and coffee. Just as he shut the door and turned to make his way towards the building, a sudden clatter echoed through the parking garage, causing him to startle and nearly drop his provisions. What in the hell? Carl muttered, his heart rate quickening as he spun around to locate the source of the disturbance. His eyes widened in alarm as he spotted a figure at the gate, frantically thrashing against it as if trying to force their way inside. "Keep moving. I don't have any money for you," Carl called out. His words were met with only moans and groans from the person at the gate, their actions relentless and unyielding. "I don't know what you're on, but you need to go sleep it off, buddy," Carl yelled. However, his attention was abruptly drawn back to the gate as another figure slammed against it, joining in the frenzied thrashing and moaning. "What in the hell?" Carl repeated incredulously. Carl's heart pounded in his chest as he cautiously approached the gate, his eyes locked on the four figures thrashing against it with unnatural ferocity. The sight sent a chill down his spine, his mind struggling to comprehend the inexplicable scene unfolding before him. As he drew nearer, Carl could see that something was dreadfully wrong with the creatures before him. Their blank expressions and wide, vacant eyes bespoke a disturbing absence of consciousness or intelligence, replaced instead by an overwhelming primal rage. "What in God's name is happening?" Carl whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of moans and thrashing. Stopping a safe distance from the gate, Carl studied the creatures intently, noting their erratic movements and agitated response to his presence. Though the slats between the bars prevented them from reaching through, Carl remained wary of any potential danger posed by their frenzied actions. "Well, you're definitely interested in me. I can't say that the feeling is mutual," Carl remarked dryly, his words tinged with unease as he observed the creature's relentless focus on him. His attention was abruptly diverted as two more figures joined the group at the gate. One of them, a young female jogger, bearing gruesome injuries, chunks of flesh missing from its body. "What in the world happened to you?" Carl exclaimed, his voice filled with horror and disbelief. Carl's gaze shifted from the jogger, her torn outfit soaked in blood, to the man in the business suit, the remnants of his grisly feast still staining his lips. Anger and disbelief surged through Carl as he struggled to comprehend. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and horror as he confronted the man. Nothing about the situation made sense. Carl's mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle before him. It wasn't until he noticed the plastic hospital bracelet adorning one of the creatures that the pieces began to fall into place. "Oh my God," Carl muttered, his heart sinking as realization dawned on him. With a sense of urgency gripping him, Carl retrieved his food and coffee from the hood of his car and broke into a run towards the building. Every second counted, and he knew that time was not on their side. Chapter 2. Carl secured the door behind him and proceeded down the hallway towards the main control room, the sound of frantic voices growing louder with each step. Approaching the door, Carl peered through the glass that lined the entire room, taking in the sight of dozens of monitors displaying various maps and live feeds of the city. Hotspots indicated areas where reports had been filed, while other screens rotated through live feeds of government buildings and landmarks. A chill ran down Carl's spine as he caught sight of movement on some of the feeds, eerily reminiscent of the creatures he had encountered at the gate. Inside the control room, 3 men worked feverishly, each one multitasking between phones and computers in a desperate attempt to keep up with the unfolding chaos. Grant, though only in his 40s, appeared haggard and worn, his shoulders weighed down by the burden of responsibility as he barked orders into multiple phones. At the front of the room stood Tyler, a newcomer to the team with a physique reminiscent of a tank. His military background was evident in his disciplined demeanor, though the specifics of his service remained a mystery to his colleagues. In the back of the room, Carl spotted Antonio, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he worked intently on the computers. While Carl wasn't entirely sure what Antonio was doing, he knew that Antonio's sharp intellect often made him the smartest person in the room, so whatever task he was engaged in must have been crucial. Entering the room with purpose, Carl's arrival drew the immediate attention of Grant, who hastily set down the phones he had been juggling and rushed over to greet him. "Thank God you got here, okay, Carl," Grant exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "I didn't get here by much," Carl replied grimly. "What happened?" Grant inquired, his brow furrowing with concern. "We have a few visitors that really want to get into the parking garage. Carl explained tersely, his gaze flickering towards the monitors. Grant turned to Tyler, issuing a rapid command. I need eyes on the garage now. On it, Tyler responded, quickly accessing the garage camera feed and displaying it for the room to see. All eyes, except for Antonio's, were drawn to the screen, where the unsettling sight of the ghoulish figures thrashing at the gate sent a chill through the room. I don't know what's wrong with them, but they got here just after I did, Carl continued, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Grant sighed heavily, his expression reflecting a mix of frustration and resignation. My God, they're everywhere. Grant, fill me in, buddy. What's going on? Carl pressed. 90 minutes ago, we got a call from North General Hospital. They reported some sort of issue and thought we needed to be aware of it, Grant began, his tone grave. What was the issue? Carl inquired. You know how we've been tracking that virulent flu that's been running through the city the last couple of days? Grant asked. Yeah, Carl replied. Well, they said that a couple of those flu patients had gone from so weak they couldn't move to attacking nurses and other patients. The police were dispatched, but we didn't hear anything else from them, Grant explained. Carl's confusion deepened as Grant spoke. What do you mean you didn't hear anything else from them? We have direct lines to every hospital in the city, Carl interjected. I know, but the line got disconnected. We tried the main lines, but it was the same story. It was ringing, but nobody was picking up, Grant clarified. What about the cops? Carl pressed. We reached out to dispatch, but they couldn't raise them either, Grant admitted. Carl shook his head in frustration before turning his attention to the map screen, which displayed a disconcerting array of red incident reports scattered throughout Manhattan and beyond. Jesus, okay, fill me in on that, Carl requested. Over the last hour, just about every hospital in the city reported similar incidents. Flu patients going crazy and attacking people, Grant explained, his words punctuated by a sense of disbelief. Were they biting the victims? Carl inquired. Grant and Tyler exchanged shocked glances before Grant responded. Yeah, but how in the hell did you know that? One of our parking garage visitors was covered in bite marks. Some poor lady who was out for a jog, missing huge chunks of flesh, Carl revealed. Wait, was she on the ground in the alley? Grant questioned. No, she was up and moving just like the others. One of them had blood around their mouth too, Carl recounted grimly. Good God, we're dealing with an outbreak of something, Grant concluded. Yeah, but what? Tyler interjected. Something that screws people up. That's for damn sure, Carl replied. Carl approached Antonio, whose fingers flew across the keyboard with urgency. Antonio, what do you have for me? Carl inquired. Hey boss, sorry. I don't have much of anything, Antonio replied, his gaze fixed on the screen. Then what in the hell are you working on? Carl pressed. I've been trying to get a hold of my federal contacts, see if they could shed some light into what we're dealing with, Antonio explained. And they don't have anything. Carl's concern deepened. It's worse than that. 2/3 of the contact list has gone AWOL. Can't get a hold of any of them, Antonio disclosed. And the other third? Carl probed. Mostly wondering why they can't get a hold of the others. It seems like everybody is in the dark about what's going on, Antonio revealed. Carl sighed heavily, shaking his head. His unexpected reaction puzzled Antonio, who braced himself for one of Carl's infamous explosive outbursts. Thanks, Antonio, Carl said, surprising Antonio even more with his composed demeanor. Antonio exchanged a worried glance with Grant and Tyler, who mirrored his concern. Carl's behavior was uncharacteristic, and they sensed something was amiss. Carl, are you okay? Grant voiced their shared apprehension. No, Grant, I'm not, Carl confessed. Do you want to fill us in? Because if I'm being honest, your calm demeanor is scaring the hell out of me, Tyler admitted. I think what Tyler is trying to say is, you're acting a bit out of character, Grant added. If it will put you both at ease, I could curse some, Carl offered lightly. I don't think it's going to help much at this point, Tyler replied. So out with it, Grant urged. Okay, if Washington has gone radio silent, it can only mean one of two things. One possibility is that they really don't have any idea what's happening, which is terrifying, Carl began to explain. And the other possibility, Antonio prompted, that they know exactly what is going on, and having it overrun New York City is so far down the list of importance that they don't have time to fill us in, Carl concluded grimly. The group exchanged apprehensive glances as the weight of Carl's words sank in. So what do we do, boss? Antonio's voice broke the heavy silence. Carl pondered for a moment before issuing commands. Forget about the feds, Antonio. We have to assume that they're not going to help. We also need to make some other assumptions, Carl declared, snapping his fingers and pointing at Grant. Whiteboard, now, he ordered. Grant sprang into action, rushing to the whiteboard mounted on the wall and wiping it clean. Grabbing a marker, he turned to Carl, awaiting further instructions. We need to make some assumptions and game plan from there. So what do we think we know about what's going on? Carl prompted, as the team began to brainstorm. Grant jotted down their ideas on the board as they brainstormed. We know the hospitals are overrun, Grant contributed, and that people who had the flu were turning into whatever those things are, Tyler added grimly. And we know that bites turn them too, Carl interjected, his tone grave. As they continued to brainstorm, Antonio focused on his computer, inputting figures into a complex equation program. We also know the police force is down 30%, and that's before losing contact with those at the hospitals, Grant added. How in the hell are the police down 30%? Carl questioned, his brows furrowing in concern. There were a lot of call-ins today. That flu has been nasty, Grant explained. Wait, 30% of the police are down with the flu, Antonio clarified, disbelief evident in his tone. Give or take, Grant confirmed solemnly. Antonio's complexion drained of color as he pounded the keys of his computer with fervor. The forceful typing drew the attention of everyone in the room, silencing their conversation as they watched him intently. After a solid minute of intense typing, the room fell silent, the only sound being Antonio muttering a quiet prayer to himself. Antonio, are you okay, buddy? Carl's concern tinged his voice. I think I'm going to be sick, Carl, Antonio admitted, his voice trembling. Carl's anxiety spiked. You don't have that flu, do you? He asked cautiously. No, I do not, but I don't think it's going to matter if my projections are correct, Antonio replied grimly. What projections? Grant inquired, his curiosity piqued. I took the parameters you were discussing and extrapolated from there, trying to figure out how many of these people we're dealing with, Antonio explained. Now, trying to factor in bites that result in death was a little difficult, so it's not going to be exact, however. Carl let out a sharp whistle, interrupting Antonio and capturing his attention. Antonio, I hired you for a reason, and it's because I trust what you do. Hell, you have a higher IQ than the rest of us in here put together. So don't worry about the how, just give me the what, Carl reassured him. Okay, boss, Antonio nodded. If that 30% number is accurate, and everybody who catches the flu goes crazy, we're going to be looking at around 500,000 of those people running wild. And that's just in Manhattan. Stunned silence filled the room as everyone processed the magnitude of Antonio's revelation. Finally, Tyler broke the silence with a soldier's resolve. Carl, call it out. What do we do? Tyler's voice was steady and resolute. Carl deliberated for a moment before responding. Before we do anything, we need to make sure this building is locked down tight, Carl declared. The parking garage is secure, right? Grant inquired. Yeah, that gate is locked down tight, Carl confirmed. Antonio's fingers danced over the keyboard for a moment before he spoke up. And I just disabled the keypad, so nobody is going to be getting through there unless I want them to, he announced confidently. That's going to suck for Eric, Carl remarked casually. Grant and Tyler exchanged terrified glances at the mention of Eric, the group's newcomer whom Carl was mentoring. Their expressions puzzled Carl. What is it? Did he call in sick or something? Carl inquired, sensing their unease. No, he went for a smoke break 20 minutes ago, Grant explained, his voice tinged with anxiety. Carl pointed to Tyler, his tone urgent as he turned to leave the room. Tyler, you're with me. Tyler bolted from the room, swiftly making his way down the hallway towards the back door, which stood slightly ajar. He glanced back at Carl, who waved him on. Just get to the door. Carl shouted after him. Tyler approached the door cautiously, his military training kicking in as he heard noises on the other side. He moved quietly and carefully, his senses heightened. As he reached the door, he stepped into the darkened alleyway. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust, but he quickly spotted Eric on the ground, surrounded by 3 creatures tearing into him. Tyler, do you see him? Carl yelled from the hallway. The noise alerted the creatures, and they turned their attention towards Tyler, sprinting at him with unnatural speed. He quickly retreated through the door, attempting to slam it shut behind him. Tyler struggled to close the door as 2 of the creatures wedged themselves in the opening, their bony ribs scraping against the frame. I need some help here, Tyler shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Chapter 3. Tyler's knuckles whitened as he strained against the resistance of the door, muscles taut beneath his skin as he struggled to shut it. The 2 figures on the other side, grotesque and unyielding, thwarted his efforts with their menacing presence. Despite Tyler's formidable strength, the door's edge pressed into the creature's ribs, the frame bearing down upon them from the opposite direction. Pain should have been coursing through their body, but the creature seemed impervious to it, their relentless assault unabated. With each thrash and smack, the zombies unleashed their fury upon Tyler, forcing him to lean back in a desperate bid for distance. Yet he could only retreat so far, the door demanding constant pressure to hold them at bay. Amidst the chaos, Carl sprinted down the hallway, his eyes scanning for a solution. A glimmer of hope ignited within him as he spied the fire extinguisher in the break room that was next to the alley door. Hold them, Carl exclaimed, determination lacing his voice as he addressed Tyler. I'll be right back. Frustration etched across Tyler's face as he shot back. Where the hell are you going? Without a word, Carl burst into the break room, his heart pounding with urgency as he raced to the wall and snatched the extinguisher. The metallic clang of his hurried movements echoed through the room as he sprinted back to the fray. As Carl approached, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, causing his heart to lurch in dread. He emerged from the break room to find Tyler, his face contorted in agony, a gaping wound on his arm. Yet, despite the injury, Tyler remained steadfast, his grip on the door unwavering. With a surge of adrenaline, Carl charged towards Tyler, the extinguisher raised high above his head. With a swift, forceful motion, he brought it crashing down upon one of the ghouls, aiming for their arms in a desperate attempt to deter them. However, the blows proved as futile as the resistance of the door, the creatures unfazed by the assault. Carl's swings grew wilder, desperation driving him to strike at their heads, but his efforts yielded no fruitful results. He glanced down at Tyler's slipping hands, a sinking feeling settling in the pit of his stomach. Even amidst the cacophony of moans and thrashing, Carl could discern the ominous sound of more approaching from the alleyway. We're not going to be able to shut this door, Carl admitted grimly, his voice tinged with defeat. But we have to, Tyler yelled. Carl's focus narrowed on the ghoul, attempting to sink its teeth into Tyler, prompting him to deliver another forceful strike with the extinguisher, diverting its attention momentarily. What do we do? Tyler's voice quivered with urgency, his eyes darting between Carl and the relentless undead. When I give the signal, Carl replied, his tone steady despite the situation, you let go of the door and get into the break room. Tyler's disbelief was palpable. Are you crazy? Trust me. Carl's assurance cut through the tension, his gaze locking with Tyler's. Tyler's gaze fell to his bloodied hands, realization dawning upon him that his grip was faltering. With the imminent threat of reinforcements looming, they had no time to waste. Okay, fine, give me the signal, Tyler relented, resignation coloring his words. Carl nodded, his resolve unwavering as he raised the extinguisher high above his head, aligning it with the two creatures blocking their escape. On three. 1, 2, 3. Carl's command echoed through the hallway as Tyler released his hold on the door, instinct propelling him backward. In that instant, Carl brought the extinguisher crashing down upon the ghouls, disrupting their balance and sending them crashing to the ground. Without hesitation, Carl abandoned the extinguisher, sprinting towards the break room with Tyler just ahead. As he reached the safety of the room, Tyler turned, his heart racing as he awaited Carl's arrival. "Get in here," Tyler yelled. As Carl propelled himself through the door, Tyler slammed it shut with a desperate force. Yet, their relief was short-lived as Zombie Eric's arm protruded through the narrowing gap, thwarting their attempts to secure their sanctuary. Drawing from newfound resolve, Tyler seized the ghoul's arm, wrenching it into the room before slamming the door shut with a resounding thud. Carl's eyes widened in shock as he scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest as Zombie Eric tumbled towards him with menacing intent. "Jesus Christ." Carl's exclamation echoed through the room as he rolled aside, narrowly avoiding the undead creature's grasp. Eric landed with a thud on the table beside him, his hungry gaze fixated on Carl. With a surge of adrenaline, Tyler sprang into action, delivering a powerful shoulder blow that sent the smaller ghoul sprawling to the ground. Ignoring Carl's presence, Tyler focused solely on the imminent threat within the room. Zombie Eric regained his footing, his movements frenzied as he lunged towards Tyler with malicious intent. As the ghoul closed in, Tyler seized him by the throat, holding him in a vice-like grip, despite the creature's violent struggles. Staring his former co-worker down, Tyler's voice cut through the air with remorse. "I'm sorry this happened to you, man. I really am. But there's nothing I can do for you now." With a fluid motion, Tyler seized Zombie Eric by the legs, hoisting him up horizontally before executing a backbreaker move reminiscent of a scene from a Saturday afternoon wrestling program. The audible snap of the spine echoed through the room as Tyler unleashed his full strength, unyielding in his resolve. Discarding the broken creature to the floor, Tyler approached Carl, extending a hand to help him to his feet. "Are you okay?" Tyler's concern was evident in his voice as he surveyed Carl for any signs of injury. "Yeah, I think so. I don't really want to do that again," Carl replied. As they conversed, Zombie Eric continued to flail about, his movements limited by the broken spine but still unstintingly animated. "What in God's name?" Carl's disbelief was palpable as he observed the ghoul's futile struggles. Tyler shook his head in frustration. "I hate it when I'm right." "Right about what?" Carl inquired. "When I was holding those things in place with the door, I was certain I broke ribs, but they didn't react. So I wanted to test my theory," Tyler explained. Carl examined Eric closely, confirming Tyler's assessment that the broken back hindered movement but caused no apparent pain. "Well, they're not invincible, so we got that going for us. But how do we kill them?" Carl asked. Tyler shrugged, his gaze shifting to the break room counter where he retrieved a knife from a drawer. With deliberate precision, he knelt beside Eric and plunged the blade into his heart, only to be met with disappointment as the creature remained unaffected. "Well, that's terrifying," Carl remarked. Tyler withdrew the knife, contemplating his next move before decisively driving it into the ghoul's skull. As the blade pierced the brain, Eric fell silent, his lifeless body slumping to the ground. "Okay, so a shot to the brain seems to do the trick. Now we just need to figure out how to get that message out to the masses," Carl said. As they peered out the windows of the break room, Tyler and Carl were met with the unsettling sight of half a dozen zombies pressing against the glass, their relentless efforts to break through evident. "We're going to need some bigger knives if we're doing that," Tyler remarked, his gaze fixed on the advancing horde. Carl's attention was drawn to Tyler's arm, his eyes narrowing as he observed the significant bite wound. "Sit down. Let me take care of that," Carl insisted. "It's fine," Tyler dismissed. "Tyler, sit your big ass down and let me take care of that wound," Carl commanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I never got certified, but I took a few paramedic classes when I was with the fire department. It isn't going to be perfect, but at least I'll be able to keep you from bleeding on everything." Reluctantly, Tyler acquiesced, taking a seat as directed. Meanwhile, Carl rummaged through the cabinets in search of supplies to treat the wound. As Carl tended to him, Tyler's gaze remained fixed on the zombies outside, watching as they clawed at the glass. "We need to get that door shut," Tyler asserted. "We need to do a lot of things." "Now sit still," Carl admonished, his focus on the task at hand. Carl paused momentarily, utilizing a dish towel and some vodka to patch up the wound. Tyler winced as the alcohol stung upon contact, its pungent odor filling the room and prompting confusion. "Where in the hell did you get vodka from?" Tyler inquired. "One of the cleaning ladies was from Russia," Carl explained matter-of-factly. "Apparently it's cheaper and more effective than some of the oven cleaners we were buying. So they approved the purchase to save a few bucks." "And they didn't think anybody would drink it?" Tyler remarked incredulously. "A fifth of this stuff is $4, Carl replied with a wry grin. "I would hate to think of how much of an alcoholic you'd have to be if you were drinking this stuff." Tyler chuckled softly, a hint of nostalgia coloring his expression as he reminisced. "I knew a few guys back in the service that would have downed that in a heartbeat. After some of those patrols, I probably would have done the same," he admitted with a wistful shake of his head. "So you had some rough days back then?" Carl inquired, his curiosity evident. "At the time, I thought they were," Tyler replied, his tone reflective. "People in the shadows shooting at me, everything on the side of the road potentially being an explosive. I did 2 tours and somehow came home in one piece. I told myself that my days of risky jobs were over, so I took what amounted to an office job." Tyler gestured to his wound, shaking his head. "And here I am with a death sentence," he remarked somberly. "Now we don't know that," Carl interjected optimistically. "We have a reasonable idea. Besides, we don't have the luxury of sitting around and waiting to find out. Because we need to get that outside door closed," Tyler insisted, his voice firm with resolve. "Do you really want to fight through 6 of those things?" Carl questioned, his concern evident. "No, and we may not have to," Tyler replied with a mischievous smirk. Confusion clouded Carl's features, prompting Tyler to elaborate. "We'll just have to do a little diversion," Tyler explained cryptically. "Okay, but how?" Carl pressed. "I know the world is falling apart, but I'm pretty sure your phone is still working, isn't it?" Tyler queried. Realization dawned on Carl, prompting a laugh at the oversight. "Yeah, it does. I'll give Grant a call right now." Carl quickly dialed up Grant, who answered in hushed tones. "Carl, are you okay?" Grant asked. "More or less. Is it still clear up your way?" Carl inquired. "Yeah, it is. Did you get the door shut?" Grant questioned. "No, we didn't, and we have 6 of those things hanging out by the break room door. We're going to need your help if we're going to get that door shut," Carl explained. "What do you need?" Grant asked, his tone brimming with readiness. "When we're ready, we're going to need you to start making some racket up your way. Pull those things in your direction," Carl instructed. There was a tense silence on the line as Carl awaited Grant's response. "Did you hear me, Grant?" Carl prompted. "Yeah, I did, Carl. We can do that, but there's a problem," Grant finally replied. "There usually is." "What is it?" Carl asked. "The lock on the control room door isn't working," Grant revealed. "What in the hell? How?" Carl muttered in disbelief. "The last update fried the keycard lock. Technician was supposed to be here on Monday," Grant explained. Carl pondered the predicament for a moment before a realization dawned upon him. He turned to Tyler to relay the information. "Their door doesn't lock," Carl informed Tyler. "Tell them that if they can hold the door for a minute, I'll take care of these guys from behind," Tyler declared, a steely resolve emanating from his gaze. Carl relayed the message to Grant, his voice steady despite the less than ideal situation. "Grant, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm going to need you to hold your door in place when we start this. Tyler says he's got your back." "Okay, we'll do it. Just don't leave us hanging too long," Grant replied. "Tyler won't. We're going to get ready and let you know when it's time," Carl assured him before ending the call. Turning to Tyler, who was already brimming with readiness, Carl issued a directive. Get what you need, because we need to move before more of those things get in. Tyler nodded in acknowledgement, making his way to the kitchen area to arm himself. Meanwhile, Carl remained seated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the zombies in the hallway as they continued to pound on the door and windows, desperate to get inside. Patience, my friends. We'll be with you in just a minute. Chapter 4. Tyler positioned himself by the door of the break room, his grip firm on the knife he had wielded against Eric. Along his belt, several other knives gleamed, each serving as a backup should the need arise. He hoped one would suffice, but he wasn't willing to take any chances. Okay, we are not going to have long to do this. Grant and Antonio are a lot of things, but bodybuilders aren't one of them. So it's going to be up to you to close that door, Tyler asserted. Carl nodded, holding up a knife in acknowledgement. I'll take care of it. You have my word. Good. Because if you don't, then I'm not going to be the only one of us with one of these, Tyler remarked, holding up his bite wound in a gesture meant to lighten the mood. However, Carl remained tense, the gravity of their situation weighing heavily upon him. Tyler offered a playful wink before Carl gave him a thumbs up, indicating his readiness. Make the call, Tyler instructed, his gaze fixed on the phone in Carl's hand. Carl dialed up Grant, who answered promptly. We're in position. Let's make it happen, Carl declared. Stand by, Grant replied. The two men stood by the door, the persistent banging on the glass fading into the background as they awaited their colleague's signal. Moments passed in tense silence until the sound of yelling echoed from the far end of the hallway. To their relief, each of the 6 zombies by the break room turned and sprinted towards the control room, their frenzied movements guided by the diversion. Carl moved towards the door of the break room, but Tyler halted him with a raised hand, his voice a mere whisper. Not yet, Tyler cautioned, his eyes focused on the hallway beyond. They need your help, Carl urged. I said not yet, Tyler reiterated. With a reluctant nod, Carl acquiesced to Tyler's command, recognizing the wisdom in deferring to his experience in such dire circumstances. After what felt like an eternity of anticipation, Tyler finally signaled his readiness with a decisive nod, prompting Carl to act. With focused intensity, Tyler darted out of the room, his movements swift and purposeful as he sprinted down the hallway. Meanwhile, Carl emerged from the break room, his gaze fixed on the open back door that loomed ominously before him. As he approached the door, Carl hesitated, a wave of fear washing over him at the thought of what might await him in the alleyway. But he knew he had no choice. Survival depended on his ability to push past his fear and confront the unknown. Suck it up, Carl. If you don't do it, you're dead, Carl muttered to himself. Summoning every ounce of strength, Carl rushed up to the door, his hand closing around the handle. But before he could shut it, a zombie came hurtling towards him, its outstretched hand grasping for the door, its vacant eyes fixed on its prey. Oh shit, Carl exclaimed. Reacting purely on instinct, Carl thrust his knife upward with all his might, aiming for the ghoul's vulnerable point. Miraculously, the tip of the blade pierced the bottom of the zombie's jaw with enough force to penetrate its brain. The ghoul stumbled momentarily before collapsing to the ground in a heap. Carl stood there, stunned by his blind luck, before snapping out of it and swiftly dragging the dead zombie inside before finally securing the door. With the door firmly shut, Carl threw the deadbolt before retrieving his knife from the lifeless ghoul's head. Okay, let's go help the others, Carl muttered to himself. As Carl wrestled with securing the back door, Tyler charged headlong into danger, his focus squarely on intercepting the half-dozen zombies barreling towards his friends and co-workers in the control room. Locking eyes with the approaching undead, Tyler calculated his approach, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The first few zombies had already reached the door, with the others hot on their heels. Tyler's determined footsteps echoed on the floor, drawing the attention of the sprinting ghoul at the back of the pack, who abruptly changed course and lunged towards him. Without breaking stride, Tyler readied his knife for a straight stab, his movements fluid and practiced. As he closed in on the ghoul, he pulled back his arm before thrusting it forward with precision. The blade found its mark, plunging directly into the eye socket of the ghoul with a sickening thud. The impact was forceful enough to send the creature tumbling to the ground, its body convulsing in its final moments. The noise of the falling ghoul caught the attention of the next one in line, who paused momentarily before redirecting its focus towards Tyler. Drawing another knife, Tyler pressed on, determined to eliminate the threat. As the ghoul closed in, Tyler and the undead creature met in a collision of force just yards from the door to the control room. However, this time, Tyler's thrust was slightly off target, the blade piercing through the cheek of the creature instead of its skull. In its counterattack, the ghoul tackled Tyler to the ground with surprising strength. The impact knocked the wind out of Tyler as he hit the floor, the ghoul pinning him down with relentless aggression. In a horrifying moment of vulnerability, Tyler found himself defenseless against the ghoul's onslaught, unable to prevent it from sinking its teeth into his shoulder, tearing away a chunk of flesh in a vicious bite. Tyler stifled a scream, the agony of his shoulder wound searing through him as he fought to maintain his composure. He knew that attracting the attention of another creature would spell certain doom, so instead, he grunted with effort as he reached for a knife from his belt, his fingers wrapping around the blade as he grabbed the ghoul by the throat, pushing it back with all his might to create some distance. With a precise motion, Tyler drove the knife into the side of the zombie's head, feeling the resistance give way as the blade pierced its skull. With a quick twist, he dispatched the ghoul before tossing it off of him and scrambling to his feet, adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he drew another knife and turned his focus towards the control room, his heart sank at the sight before him. Despite his best efforts, he was too late. The ghouls had breached the door, their grotesque forms spilling into the room like a tide of death. Fueled by rage and desperation, Tyler let out a primal scream as he charged into the fray. To his left, he spotted two creatures atop someone, their frenzied movements obscured by the desk. It didn't matter who they were attacking, Tyler knew he had to act fast to eliminate the threat. With lightning speed, Tyler jammed the knife into the back of the creature's skull, targeting the base for maximum effect. With a single decisive blow, he silenced the threat, the ghoul collapsing to the ground in a lifeless heap. In one fluid motion, he yanked the knife free and tossed the ghoul aside, his gaze fixed on the next target. "You're next," Tyler roared, his voice laced with fury. Tyler's rage surged uncontrollably as he tore the feasting ghoul off Grant, who lay convulsing beneath him from the gruesome injuries inflicted upon him. Despite the throbbing pain in his injured arm and shoulder, Tyler's fury only seemed to intensify, driving him to greater acts of brutality. With a savage force, Tyler shoved the ghoul into the window with enough strength to crack the glass, then unleashed a relentless barrage of stabs to the back of its head, each strike sending blood splattering in all directions. The assault continued unabated until the knife blade snapped off in the ghoul's skull, leaving Tyler frustrated and seething with anger as he cast the creature aside with a primal yell. "I'm not done with you assholes yet," Tyler bellowed, his voice echoing with raw fury as he turned his attention to the two other creatures feasting on Antonio by his computer. Despite the muffled cries of agony emanating from Antonio, Tyler pressed on with unwavering resolve. Once again, Tyler approached the ghouls from behind, but this time, as he advanced down the aisle, he grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it back with a deafening crash. The noise alerted one of the zombies, its eyes fixated on Tyler as it turned towards him with a sickeningly satisfied moan. Undeterred, Tyler stood his ground, his blood-soaked form a grim testament to his determination. As the ghoul charged towards him, Tyler seized it by the neck, holding it in place as he delivered a relentless onslaught of knife stabs to its face, each strike draining the life from the creature. With the threat neutralized, Tyler hurled the beast back onto the other one, pinning it to the ground atop Antonio. Seizing the opportunity, Tyler pressed his knee into the back of the pile, keeping the zombie's head firmly pinned against Antonio's prone form. "This is for my friends," Tyler declared, his voice laced with vengeance as he prepared to deliver justice to the abominations that had wrought such devastation upon his comrades. Tyler raised the knife high above his head before driving it into the back of the ghoul's skull, ending the threat once and for all. As he sat there, catching his breath amidst the carnage, Carl came running up, his expression a mixture of fear and grief, as he took in the sight of Grant and Antonio lying lifeless on the floor, and Tyler covered in blood and exhaustion. Before Carl could say anything, Both he and Tyler heard movement coming from Grant, who was beginning to reanimate. They sat there in stunned silence, unsure of how to react, as the zombified Grant pulled himself up from the ground, missing several chunks of flesh before looking around. "Grant?" Carl called out tentatively. The zombified Grant turned towards Carl with a guttural moan before lunging right towards him. With no other choice, Carl acted on instinct, grabbing the door and pulling it closed with all his strength, bracing himself for the impact as Grant collided with it. Through the glass, Carl gazed at his former friend and co-worker, now transformed into a violent and mindless creature. Just like the creatures they had encountered in the parking garage, there was no trace of humanity left in Grant's eyes. As Carl held the door in place, Tyler approached from behind Grant, dispatching him with a fatal blow. In an instant, Grant went from thrashing and pushing against the door to a lifeless husk sliding down to the floor. As Carl eased up on the pressure, he turned to Tyler, who was clearly in rough shape. The bandage on his arm had come undone, and the bite on his shoulder was bleeding profusely. But as Carl moved to help, Tyler held up his hand to stop him. "Stay in the hallway." "This isn't over yet," Tyler declared. As Carl nodded in agreement, he watched Tyler carefully approach Antonio, who was beginning to reanimate under the weight of the two bodies on top of him. It was evident that Antonio's weakened state couldn't overcome the obstacles pinning him down. With a solemn pause, Tyler hovered over Antonio before reaching down and carefully pushing the knife through his eye and into his brain, swiftly ending the threat. As Tyler began to walk back towards the door, the effects of blood loss began to take their toll, causing him to stumble and fall to one knee. With urgency, Carl rushed to his side, offering support as Tyler leaned against one of the desks. "Just hang in there, Tyler. I'll grab the med kit," Carl reassured him, already turning to retrieve it. However, Tyler's grip on Carl's arm stopped him in his tracks, startling him. "Come on, man. There's not much time," Carl urged. "You're right, there isn't. I'm starting to lose feeling in my legs." "I only have a couple of minutes left," Tyler admitted, his tone resigned. Though Carl wanted to argue, he knew deep down that Tyler was right. This was the end for him. As he looked into the ex-soldier's blood-soaked face, he saw no trace of regret, only a profound sadness. "I tried to get to them. I really did," Tyler confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. "I know, Tyler. You did everything you could," Carl replied, his own voice choked with emotion. "I just wish it could have been more," Tyler lamented, his gaze distant. "You've done enough. You can rest easy now," Carl assured him, trying to offer some semblance of comfort in the face of impending loss. Tyler offered a faint smirk as he held up a knife, handing it over to Carl. "You still have work to do, though," he said, his voice faint but determined. "Is there another one of those things around?" Carl asked, a sense of urgency creeping into his tone. "There's about to be," Tyler replied. It took Carl a moment to comprehend, but he shook his head in denial when he realized Tyler was talking about himself. "I can't," Carl protested, his voice strained with emotion. "If you don't do it now, you're going to have to face me when I'm not in control. And no offense, boss, but you're not going to win that battle," Tyler reasoned, his tone oddly calm, despite the gravity of the situation. His attempt at humor elicited a chuckle from Carl, despite the heaviness of their exchange. Tyler's coughing fit interrupted the moment, splattering blood onto the floor. "Okay, it's now or never," Tyler declared, his voice weaker than before. He slumped to the ground, rolling onto his stomach, triggering another fit of coughing. "What do I do?" "I don't want it to be painful for you," Carl expressed. "Put the tip of the blade at the base of my skull and aim it up. Once you have it in place, hit the hilt as hard as you can with the palm of your hand," Tyler instructed, his voice steady despite his condition. Carl nodded and followed Tyler's guidance, positioning the blade but hesitating before delivering the final blow. "It's been a pleasure, Tyler." "Thank you for everything," Carl said, his voice thick with emotion. Tyler attempted to respond, but he was too weak to articulate his words fully. Without further delay, Carl summoned all his strength and resolve, delivering a forceful palm strike to the hilt of the knife, driving it into Tyler's brain. Tyler's body convulsed briefly before going still, leaving Carl sitting beside him in stunned silence. Surveying the scene of blood and death around him, Carl knew he had to continue his duties, but he felt paralyzed by the weight of the loss and devastation surrounding him. Chapter 5. As the hours passed, Carl worked tirelessly through the night. The bodies of both interlopers and his friends had been moved to the parking garage, out of the way and somewhat mitigating the pervasive smell. Approaching the whiteboard, Carl surveyed the extensive list of tasks, noting several items already checked off. These included informing the police and first responders on handling the situation, attempting to contact news stations, and various other office-related matters. "Well, Carl, you're getting there," he remarked to himself, a sense of weary accomplishment in his voice. One item remained scheduled for 9 a.m., the emergency broadcast to the public. Glancing at his watch, Carl noted it was 8:13 a.m. Well, it couldn't hurt to give another general warning, he mused aloud. Carl made his way to a desk with a microphone attached, pressing the button to initiate the emergency broadcast signal. Once it ceased, he spoke in a brisk, authoritative tone. "Hello? Hey, this is on. Okay, if you can hear my voice, you need to keep your asses inside. We don't have a clue what's going on, only that going outside significantly increases your chances of death. So stay where you are. We'll provide more information when we know more." With a wry chuckle, Carl switched off the broadcast. "Fifth one of those I've done today. I really need to get more eloquent when 9 rolls around. With an event like this, what I say might end up in a documentary," he remarked. "Who am I kidding? If this thing is as bad as it looks, we'll be lucky to have anyone come out the other side of it," he concluded with a heavy sigh. Carl scanned through his checklist, his gaze lingering on 2 items: food and radios. "Well, I could use a pick-me-up. Never did get to eat my sandwich from last night," he mused aloud. With purposeful strides, Carl made his way to his cluttered desk, snagging the greasy bag of food that lay atop it. He proceeded down the dimly lit hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing against the sterile walls. Upon reaching the break room, he tossed the bag into the microwave with a casual flick of his wrist, the machine humming to life as he began rummaging through the cabinets. Amidst the shelves stacked with instant noodles, crackers, and energy bars, Carl found an assortment of provisions. "Well, that will make for some nice treats," he remarked to himself. Determined to survey all available resources, Carl ventured further into the storage closet, its door creaking open to reveal a treasure trove of supplies. With a flick of the switch, fluorescent light flooded the cramped space, illuminating rows of neatly stacked boxes. Among them, Carl's eyes fell upon a familiar sight: dozens of MRE packages neatly arranged on shelves. Chuckling to himself, he reached for a box, his fingers deftly prying it open to reveal its contents. "Chicken parm, huh?" he muttered, a wry smile playing on his lips as he inspected the package. Peering into the box, he found it brimming with numerous pouches. "My Italian grandmother is laughing her ass off in heaven right about now," he quipped. Engrossed in his calculations, Carl mentally tallied the potential duration of his newfound provisions. Each of these boxes was meant to sustain a 10-man crew for 2 weeks, he reasoned, his mind whirring with possibilities. "Which means if I don't ration, I can get 10 days out of each box, so I've got a good 8 months of food supply in here," he concluded. Carl's mind continued to churn with strategic planning, his thoughts spilling out into the quiet confines of the storage closet. "So with sporadic rationing, along with the supplement leftovers in the kitchen, I should be able to stretch it into a full year without a problem," he mused, his voice echoing softly against the walls as he pondered his provisions. Turning his attention to the emergency water supply, Carl approached the wall where a faucet and sink stood. "Emergency water supply at 50%, he noted, his brow furrowing slightly in contemplation. "If we had a full crew, that would be concerning. But with just me, I should be all right. The filtration system is relatively new, so whenever it rains or snows, it'll replenish." Satisfied with his assessment, Carl nodded to himself as he exited the room, securing it behind him with a decisive click. The shrill buzz of the microwave punctuated his departure, signaling the completion of his breakfast. Finally, he sighed with relief, settling into a chair with his meal, a greasy cheeseburger and fries. Each bite was savored, knowing that they were likely the last he was going to have for quite some time. That's a meal I'm going to remember, he reflected, savoring the last morsel as he reclined in his seat. Glancing at his watch, Carl noted the approaching hour. Okay, let's get those radios and get back to the command center, he resolved, rising from his seat with purpose. Carl exited the break room and made his way down the corridor to another storage closet. Illuminated by the flick of a switch, the room revealed shelves lined with radios. Over the next few minutes, Carl meticulously gathered every radio, carrying them with care to the control room. As he entered, his eyes were drawn to the screen, where the live feed from Times Square showed thousands of zombies running rampant. I don't think I'm ever going to get used to seeing that, he murmured. Pushing aside the grim reality outside, Carl focused on the task at hand, setting out the radios on a nearby desk. Okay, 12-hour battery on these, and I have enough charging stations back in the closet to do half of them at the same time, he said to himself. The solar panels should keep up with demand, especially once I can shut most of this stuff down. Carl deliberated for a moment, weighing his options before settling on a course of action. Okay, 19 going on at the same time, with 2 in reserve at all times. Not that I have any desire to leave this place, but it might happen, he reasoned aloud. Seating himself at a nearby desk, Carl's fingers danced across the keyboard, bringing up surveillance feeds from both inside and outside the compound. His eyes darted across the screen, noting the growing mob outside the parking garage and alley, but finding solace in the lack of movement within the building. While the first floor housed the operational hub, the second floor boasted male and female bunks with showers. Amenities rarely utilized but deemed necessary in times of crisis. Thank God for bloated government budgets, Carl quipped, a wry grin tugging at his lips as he pondered the extravagance of their facilities. Returning to the radios, Carl powered on the first 19 units, each one crackling with static as he assigned different frequencies to them. If somebody is out there, hopefully they'll reach out. Once I get situated, I'll start yelling into the void, he remarked. As his watch alarm sounded, Carl shook his head in resignation, knowing duty awaited him at the emergency broadcast radio. Once again, duty calls, he muttered. Taking a moment to collect his thoughts, Carl glanced over his notes, a comprehensive list of protocols ranging from zombie defense strategies to the grim reality of their isolation. With a nod, he reached for the controls, only to be interrupted by a blinking warning light. Oh, what now? Carl sighed. Carl's fingers flew across the keyboard in a flurry of desperate attempts to revive the malfunctioning system, but each effort was met with frustration as the screen remained stubbornly unresponsive. In a moment of instinctive impulse, Carl called out, his voice echoing in the empty room. Hey Antonio, we got. But reality quickly intervened, and Carl's self-awareness cut through the momentary lapse. Hey Carl, you're a dumbass, he chided himself, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth despite the setback. He continued to stare at the system, his mind racing with futile attempts to troubleshoot the issue, but it soon became evident that the problem was beyond his expertise. Well, so much for that. Hopefully the people out there heard the earlier messages, Carl conceded, resignation coloring his tone as he reluctantly abandoned the task at hand. Turning his attention to the array of radios on the desk, Carl selected a starting frequency and settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. Well, I guess there is one benefit in trying to reach out to people individually. It should keep the boredom away for a while. The end.